The billionaire threw his black wife out for another woman. Then he discovered who she had become. What would you do if the person who promised to protect you cast you aside for someone else? Let us see how it unfolded. By sunrise, the house she had helped turn into a home no longer had a place for her. Camille Laurent stood at the foot of the marble staircase with one suitcase beside her and a folded coat over her arm, while rain pressed softly against the tall windows of the Ashbourne estate. 12 years of marriage had been reduced to 3 bags, a signed separation agreement, and the silence of a husband who could not quite meet her eyes. Grant Ashbourne remained near the fireplace in a charcoal suit, one hand resting against the mantel as though this were an ordinary business meeting. He was 44, white, wealthy enough to own half the skyline visible from his Manhattan office, and accustomed to decisions becoming reality the moment he spoke them. Camille had once admired that certainty. Now she saw what it became when compassion was removed from it. Across the room, Vanessa Cole stood in an ivory cashmere dress, pretending to study the rain. She was younger, polished, and already moving through the estate as if imagining where her photographs would hang. Camille did not ask how long the affair had lasted. The answer no longer mattered. What mattered was the sentence Grant had delivered 10 minutes earlier, calmly, almost gently. You should leave tonight. It will be easier for everyone. Everyone. The word had included Grant, Vanessa, the staff, the attorneys, perhaps even the walls. It had not included Camille. She looked toward the dining room where she had hosted charity dinners, investor receptions, and Christmas mornings that Grant had spent answering calls. She remembered choosing the art, negotiating with architects, and sitting beside him through the years when Ashbourne Capital had been only a promising firm with more debt than prestige. Back then, Grant had called her his compass. Once the company became a private empire, he began calling her sentimental. The driver can take you to the Carlisle, he said. My office will arrange. Something more permanent tomorrow. Camille lifted her gaze. Her deep brown skin looked luminous beneath the chandelier, and although her eyes carried the exhaustion of a woman who had not slept, her posture remained straight. I do not need your office to arrange my life. Vanessa turned then, unable to hide the small flicker of surprise. Grant's jaw tightened. This does not need to become dramatic. Camille almost smiled. He had betrayed her, replaced her, and ordered her from the home she had built, yet he still feared the inconvenience of her emotion. She reached into her handbag and placed her wedding ring on the console table between them. The soft sound of gold against marble seemed louder than any accusation. You are right, she said. It does not. Grant watched her, waiting for tears, anger, or one last plea that would confirm he still held the power. Camille gave him none. She took the handle of her suitcase and walked toward the front doors. The housekeeper, Mrs. Bell, stepped forward with red eyes, but Camille gently shook her head. No goodbyes. Not yet. Outside, the rain had turned the circular drive silver. A black sedan waited beneath the portico, but it was not one of Grant's cars. The driver opened the rear door and addressed her with quiet respect. Ms. Laurent, your aunt's attorney is waiting downtown. Grant had followed her to the doorway. Your aunt's attorney? Camille paused without looking back. For years, Grant had believed her family possessed nothing worth noticing. He did not know that her late aunt had spent 4 decades building a private investment network in silence, or that Camille's name had appeared that morning on documents capable of changing far more than her address. She stepped into the car, closed the door, and left the estate behind as Grant stood under the portico, watching the first piece of a future he had never bothered to ask about disappear into the rain. The sedan carried Camille south through rain-darkened streets while Manhattan awakened behind sheets of gray glass. She sat in the back seat with her hands folded over the coat in her lap, watching storefront lights flicker on one by one. Only an hour earlier, Grant had spoken as though removing her from his home were a necessary adjustment, no different from replacing an executive who no longer fit the company's direction. He had always been skilled at turning cruelty into efficiency. Camille remembered when that skill had once impressed her. 12 years earlier, Ashbourne Capital had occupied 3 cramped rooms above a printing shop in Brooklyn. Grant had possessed ambition, charm, and a talent for convincing wealthy men that his confidence was evidence. Camille had supplied everything confidence could not. She reviewed contracts before meetings, corrected financial models after midnight, and introduced him to the foundation directors who became his first serious clients. When an early investment failed, she sold the small collection of jewelry her mother had left her and quietly covered the firm's payroll for 6 weeks. Grant had held her in the empty office afterward and promised that nothing he built would ever belong to him alone. The promise survived only until success made gratitude inconvenient. As Ashbourne Capital expanded, Camille's name disappeared from presentations. Her recommendations were repeated by men who received credit for them. At dinners, Grant introduced her as his beautiful wife, never as the strategist who had helped him survive the years no one else believed in him. She had tolerated the omissions because she mistook patience for loyalty. Vanessa arrived first as a communications consultant, then as Grant's constant companion at events Camille was told would be too tedious to attend. The truth revealed itself through small changes. Unfamiliar perfume in the town car, late meetings that never appeared on calendars, a photograph from a charity weekend in Napa where Grant's hand rested at Vanessa's waist. When Camille confronted him, he did not deny it. He only said their marriage had become incompatible with the future he wanted. The sedan stopped before a limestone building near Bryant Park. The driver opened her door beneath a wide black umbrella. Inside, an elevator carried her to the 31st floor, where a quiet conference room overlooked the city. A silver-haired attorney, named Elias Monroe, rose to greet her. He had served Camille's aunt, Dr. Lenora Laurent, for nearly 20 years. Lenora had been described within the family as private, demanding, and comfortable, but never wealthy. She had taught economics, funded scholarships anonymously, and avoided photographs. Camille had loved her without understanding the scale of the life she kept hidden. Elias placed a leather portfolio on the table. "Your aunt established Laurent Meridian Holdings 41 years ago," he said. "She built it through early investments in health technology, commercial real estate, and minority-owned financial institutions." Camille looked at the documents without touching them. Why was none of this public? Because she preferred influence to attention. Elias opened the portfolio. Inside were trust agreements, property records, and a list of corporate holdings that seemed to continue for pages. At the top of the first document was Camille's full legal name. "Dr. Laurent named you controlling trustee and executive beneficiary," he continued. "The transfer became effective at 6 o'clock this morning." Camille's breath slowed. She had arrived expecting instructions about a modest estate. Instead, the figures before her described a private network worth more than several public companies combined. Elias turned to the final page. "There is one holding you should review immediately." He slid a separate file toward her. The cover bore the name Ashbourne Capital. Camille opened it and found a detailed record of debt purchases, preferred shares, and voting rights accumulated through companies Grant had never connected to her aunt. Elias met her eyes. "Laurent Meridian is now the largest outside stakeholder in your husband's firm." Camille looked through the window at the skyline Grant believed belonged to men like him. Then she rested one hand on the file and asked the first question of her new life. "How much does he know?" Elias closed the portfolio softly. At this moment, almost nothing. Camille did not leave the conference room with a plan for revenge. She left with a responsibility. Elias Monroe arranged a temporary apartment overlooking Central Park. But before the car arrived, Camille remained alone beside the window with the Ashbourne Capital file open before her. The numbers told a story Grant had carefully hidden from everyone around him. His firm looked powerful from the outside, yet beneath the polished offices and magazine profiles, several expansion deals were underperforming. To maintain the appearance of endless growth, he had borrowed against future revenue, moved losses between subsidiaries, and relied on investors who believed his name was stronger than his balance sheet. Laurent Meridian had quietly purchased much of that debt over the previous 18 months. Camille traced one line with her finger. Grant had once taught her to read financial statements as if they were confessions. Now his company was confessing everything. Elias stood near the door, waiting without pressure. "Your aunt expected this moment might come," he said. Camille looked up. She expected Grant to fail? She expected you to need the truth. He handed her a sealed envelope written in Lenora's careful handwriting. Camille opened it slowly. The letter was brief. Lenora wrote that she had watched Camille become smaller inside a marriage that rewarded her silence. She had not intervened because Camille needed to choose freedom for herself, not inherit it as an instruction. The final line rested on the page like a hand against Camille's shoulder. Power is safest with the person who no longer needs to prove she has it. Camille read the sentence twice, then folded the letter along its original crease. What authority do I have, she asked. Elias returned to the table and opened a corporate governance binder. As controlling trustee, Camille could appoint representatives to Laurent Meridian's board, approve major transactions, and determine how the holding company used its voting rights in Ashbourne Capital. She could demand an independent audit. She could block Grant's proposed acquisition of a luxury hotel group in Chicago. With sufficient support from 2 institutional shareholders, she could also call a special board meeting. Could I remove him? She asked. Elias considered the question carefully. Not by yourself, and not without cause. But if the financial review confirms what these preliminary reports suggest, the board could suspend or replace him. Camille appreciated the answer because it was not designed to flatter her. Power did not mean rules disappeared. It meant she finally had a voice inside them. Then we do this correctly, she said. No leaks. No public spectacle. No action that cannot survive legal review. Elias nodded. Your aunt would approve. By noon, Camille had moved into the apartment with her 3 bags still unopened near the bedroom door. She changed into a navy suit, tied her hair into a low knot, and spent the afternoon meeting Laurent Meridian's senior team. Some had known Lenora for decades. Others recognized Camille only from the documents distributed that morning. No one treated her like a discarded wife. They asked for decisions, listened when she spoke, and placed reports before her that had nothing to do with Grant's opinion of her. The unfamiliar respect felt almost painful. Near sunset, Elias received a call from Ashbourne Capital's legal department. Grant had been informed that Laurent Meridian was requesting access to internal financial records. He wanted to know who had authorized it. Elias covered the phone and looked toward Camille. She could have revealed herself then. Instead, she shook her head. Tell him the controlling trustee will attend the quarterly investor dinner on Friday. Elias relayed the message. Even from across the room, Camille heard the pause on the other end. Grant asked for the trustee's name. Elias replied that the information would be provided at the event. After the call ended, Camille walked to the window. Far below, headlights moved through Manhattan like streams of gold. Friday's dinner would take place inside the Ashbourne Tower Ballroom, the same building where Grant had celebrated every major victory of his career. He would arrive expecting to charm an anonymous investor. He did not yet know that the woman he had ordered out before sunrise would enter through the main doors holding the future of his company in her hands. By Friday evening, Camille had spent 4 days learning the architecture of a fortune. Her aunt had hidden in plain sight. Each morning began before sunrise with financial briefings in the Bryant Park office. Each night ended after the city had darkened, with pages of reports arranged across the dining table in her temporary apartment. She studied Laurent Meridian not as an inheritance, but as a living system that carried the livelihoods of thousands of people. The company held medical research facilities in Boston, affordable housing partnerships in Atlanta, commercial properties along the East Coast, and investment positions in businesses Grant would once have considered too modest for his attention. Lenora had built wealth patiently, choosing stability over applause. Camille began to understand why her aunt had remained invisible. Silence had allowed her to enter rooms where vanity would have exposed her. Elias introduced Camille to the senior leadership team one decision at a time. There was Nadine Brooks, the chief financial officer, whose precise questions never softened for anyone. There was Marcus Bellamy, the general counsel, who spoke little but remembered every clause. There was Julian Cross, the president of strategic investments, who had worked beside Lenora for 17 years and watched Camille with the careful respect of someone deciding whether legacy could become leadership. Camille did not demand their confidence. She earned the beginning of it. When Nadine presented a proposal to sell 3 underperforming community clinics, Camille asked how many families would lose local care. When Julian recommended immediate foreclosure on a struggling hotel group, she requested a restructuring plan that protected hourly employees. Her decisions were not sentimental. They were disciplined, measurable, and difficult to dismiss. By Thursday afternoon, Julian placed the Ashbourne Capital Review before her. The preliminary audit revealed more than weak investments. Grant had approved an aggressive expansion strategy that depended on revenue projections his own analysts had questioned. Several senior managers had objected, but their warnings had been removed from the final board presentation. Camille recognized the pattern immediately. Grant had spent years treating disagreement as disloyalty. Now the habit threatened the company he valued more than any person. "Do we have enough to block the Chicago acquisition?" she asked. Marcus nodded. "Yes. L'Oran Meridian's preferred shares carry protective voting rights. With the pension fund's support, the transaction cannot proceed without a revised risk review." "Then block it," Camille said. "Not because of Grant. Because the numbers do not support it." Julian studied her for a moment. "He will assume this is personal." Camille closed the report. "That does not make it personal." On Friday afternoon, a stylist arrived at her apartment carrying garment bags sent by Nadine, who had insisted that the new controlling trustee could not attend her first public event dressed for mourning. Camille chose a ruby red evening gown with a sculpted one-shoulder neckline and clean, elegant lines. It was striking without asking permission to be seen. Her long black hair fell in polished waves over one shoulder, leaving her eyes uncovered. She wore Lenora's diamond earrings and the sapphire ring that marked L'Oran Meridian's controlling office. When Camille looked into the mirror, she did not see Grant's abandoned wife. She saw the woman who had corrected financial models at midnight, held companies together without recognition, and survived being erased from her own contributions. At 7:30, a black sedan stopped beneath the awning of Ashbourne Tower. Through the lobby windows, Camille could see investors gathering beneath crystal chandeliers. Grant stood near the ballroom entrance with Vanessa beside him, welcoming guests as though nothing in his world had shifted. Elias stepped from the car first and offered Camille his hand. Cameras turned toward the entrance when she emerged. Grant noticed the movement, glanced across the lobby, and froze. Vanessa followed his stare. Neither of them recognized the meaning of the executives walking behind Camille until Julian approached the registration desk and said clearly, "The L'Oran Meridian delegation has arrived." Grant recovered first. Years of speaking to investors had taught him how to hide surprise behind a welcoming expression, but Camille saw the delay before the smile reached his eyes. He stepped away from Vanessa and crossed the lobby as cameras followed the movement. "Camille," he said, lowering his voice when he reached her. "What are you doing here?" She looked at him with the same calm she had carried out of the estate 4 mornings earlier. "Attending the quarterly investor dinner." His gaze moved past her to Elias, Nadine, Julian, and Marcus. Each wore the discreet silver pin of L'Oran Meridian. Vanessa approached more slowly, her ivory gown catching the chandelier light. "Grant," she said, "is there something we should know?" Before he could answer, Julian handed his invitation to the registration attendant. "L'Oran Meridian Holdings," he said. "Delegation of 5, including the controlling trustee." The attendant checked the list, then looked up at Camille with immediate recognition. "Ms. L'Oran, welcome. Your table is at the front beside the board." Grant's face changed by degrees. First confusion, then calculation, then the first shadow of understanding. "You are with L'Oran Meridian?" he asked. Camille adjusted the gold clutch in her hand. "Yes." "In what capacity?" Elias answered before she could. "Ms. L'Oran is the controlling trustee and executive beneficiary." The lobby seemed to grow quieter around them. Several investors nearby turned openly now. Grant stared at Camille as though the woman before him had been replaced by someone wearing her face. Vanessa's confidence faded. "You never mentioned any of this," Grant said. "You never asked about my family beyond what was useful to you," Camille replied. Nadine stepped closer and glanced toward the ballroom doors. "The board is waiting." Camille gave Grant a courteous nod and walked past him. Inside, the ballroom had been arranged for celebration. Tall glass centerpieces reflected warm light across white linen, and the company's recent projects played across large screens near the stage. Camille recognized several developments whose financial models she had once reviewed in their earliest form. Her work remained everywhere, stripped of her name. An usher guided the L'Oran Meridian team to a prominent table near the board chairman. Grant and Vanessa entered moments later, but their carefully planned arrival no longer commanded the room. Conversations followed Camille instead. Some investors came to introduce themselves. Others thanked her for L'Oran Meridian's support of regional businesses. She listened, asked precise questions, and never once looked toward Grant unless business required it. When dinner ended, the chairman invited Grant to present the company's growth strategy. He took the stage with his usual confidence and described the proposed Chicago hotel acquisition as the beginning of Ashbourne Capital's next era. Slides displayed luxury towers, projected revenues, and optimistic forecasts. Camille watched Nadine mark discrepancies in the printed report. Julian turned one page toward her, indicating a debt figure that did not match the screen. Grant reached the final slide and smiled toward the room. With the continued trust of our investors, this acquisition will secure our leadership for the next decade. The chairman thanked him, then looked toward Camille. As our largest outside stakeholder, Laurent Meridian has requested time to respond. Grant's hand tightened around the presentation remote. Camille rose. The ruby gown moved like a line of fire through the muted room as she walked toward the stage. She did not rush. She did not look at Vanessa. When she reached the microphone, Grant stood only a few feet away, waiting to discover whether she had come to punish him or expose him. Camille placed the acquisition report on the podium. Laurent Meridian supports growth, she began, her voice steady. But not growth built on projections the company's own analysts rejected. A murmur moved through the ballroom. Grant stepped toward her. That is not an accurate characterization. Camille turned one page and held up the internal review. Then perhaps you can explain why 3 risk assessments were removed before the board received the final presentation. The chairman leaned forward. Vanessa went still at the head table. Grant looked at the document, and for the first time that evening, he had no prepared answer. Camille closed the report. Until an independent audit is completed, Laurent Meridian will exercise its protective voting rights and withhold approval of the Chicago acquisition. The decision landed across the room without raised voices or spectacle. Grant stared at her, finally understanding that the woman he had removed from his home now possessed the authority to stop the future he had planned. Then the chairman reached for the microphone and announced that the board would enter an emergency session immediately after dinner. The emergency session began behind frosted glass doors on the 42nd floor, while the investor dinner continued below with strained music and unfinished conversations. Grant entered the boardroom first, carrying the same confidence he had worn onto the stage, but the room no longer responded to it. The chairman sat at the center of the table with 2 independent directors on either side. Camille took the seat reserved for Laurent Meridian, with Nadine, Marcus, and Julian behind her. Elias remained near the door, his leather portfolio closed against his chest. Grant placed both hands on the table. This meeting is unnecessary, he said. The Chicago acquisition has been reviewed for months. Nadine opened a binder. It was reviewed using revenue assumptions that changed 3 times without supporting data. Grant looked at Camille rather than Nadine. You have been inside this company for 4 days. Camille met his eyes. I have been inside its numbers much longer than that. The chairman asked Grant to explain why 3 internal risk assessments had been removed from the board packet. He answered with phrases about efficiency, preliminary drafts, and market timing. Each sentence sounded polished until Marcus placed the original emails beside the final presentation. The deleted warnings had not been preliminary. They had been specific, signed, and urgent. One analyst had predicted that the acquisition could place nearly 400 jobs at risk if expected occupancy failed to materialize. Grant leaned back, his expression hardening. Every major expansion carries risk. Risk is not the issue, Camille said. Concealing it is. He turned toward her. This is about what happened between us. The accusation hung in the room, inviting everyone to reduce her authority to the anger of a discarded wife. Camille did not take the invitation. What happened between us explains why I no longer trust your judgment in private, she said. These documents explain why the board should question it in public. The chairman lowered his gaze to the reports. Julian then presented Laurent Meridian's conditions. The acquisition would remain suspended, an independent audit would begin immediately, and Grant's approval authority over major investments would be temporarily restricted until the review concluded. Grant stared at the resolution. You are asking me to surrender control of my own firm. You diluted that control years ago, the chairman replied. Tonight, you are being reminded of it. For the first time, Grant looked uncertain. He had built his identity around the belief that every room belonged to him once he entered it. Now the directors he had once selected were reading evidence he could not dismiss, and the woman he had sent away with one suitcase sat across from him without raising her voice. The vote passed 4-1. Grant was the only dissent. The chairman announced that the audit would begin Monday morning and that Camille, as Laurent Meridian's representative, would lead the stakeholder oversight committee. Vanessa waited outside the boardroom when the doors opened. Her face brightened when she saw Grant, then fell when he walked past her without speaking. She turned to Camille. You planned this before he asked you to leave. Camille stopped. No. Then how did your aunt's company end up owning part of his? By noticing weaknesses he believed no one could see. Vanessa glanced toward Grant at the elevator. Are you trying to take everything from him? Camille's expression remained calm. I'm trying to prevent him from taking everything from everyone else. Downstairs, investors gathered near the ballroom entrance as news of the suspended acquisition spread. Grant pressed the elevator button repeatedly, though the light had already changed. Before the doors opened, he looked back at Camille. You think this makes you powerful? He asked. Camille held the sapphire ring beneath the white light of the corridor. No, Grant. This only proves I stopped giving my power away. The elevator arrived. He stepped inside with Vanessa beside him, but neither of them spoke. As the doors closed, Marcus approached Camille with a sealed audit request. There is one more problem, he said. The preliminary review found payments from Ashbourne Capital to a private consulting company connected to Vanessa. Camille looked down at the name printed on the file, and the next layer of Grant's carefully protected life began to open. The consulting company was called Cole Advisory Partners, and although its name appeared on invoices for strategic communications, the records showed no staff, no office lease, and no evidence of completed work. Over 18 months, Ashbourne Capital had paid it nearly $3 million. Vanessa Cole was listed as the sole owner. By Monday morning, the audit team had traced the payments through a series of contracts approved directly by Grant. Camille sat at the head of the oversight conference table while Marcus presented the findings. The invoices described brand development, media positioning, and investor outreach, he said. But the work was either performed by Ashbourne employees or never performed at all. Nadine placed a second folder beside him. Several payments were made within days of Grant approving personal travel with Ms. Cole. Camille looked through the documents carefully. She felt no satisfaction. Betrayal inside a marriage was painful, but misuse of company money endangered employees, investors, and clients who had never agreed to finance Grant's private life. Has Grant been given the opportunity to respond? She asked. Marcus nodded. He requested that the matter remain confidential until he could speak with you. Camille closed the file. Then schedule the meeting. Grant arrived an hour later without Vanessa. He wore a dark suit, but the exhaustion in his face made him look older than he had at the estate. He entered the conference room expecting privacy and found Camille, Marcus, Nadine, and the independent board chairman waiting. This could have been handled between us, he said. Camille gestured toward the empty chair. These are company funds. There is no between us. Grant sat, but did not open the documents placed before him. Vanessa provided services to the firm. Nadine asked him to identify the services. He listed introductions, event planning, and reputation management. Marcus then produced emails showing Ashbourne employees had completed the same work. Grant's answers became shorter. Finally, he looked at Camille. You know how these arrangements work. Senior executives use outside consultants all the time. Not to conceal personal expenses, she replied. That is not what happened. Then explain it. The room remained silent while Grant searched for an answer that did not exist. He admitted that some payments had covered travel, housing, and private events, but insisted Vanessa had also supported the company's image. The chairman removed his glasses. You authorized millions of dollars without disclosure to the board. Grant turned toward Camille again. You want me removed? Just say it. Camille met his accusation without flinching. I wanted you to tell the truth before the evidence told it for you. The board chairman announced that Grant would be placed on administrative leave pending the full audit. His access to company accounts, investment approvals, and executive systems would be suspended immediately. Grant stood so quickly that the chair shifted behind him. You cannot do this. The board just did, the chairman said. Grant looked at Camille, waiting for her to soften the decision. For years, she had been the person who repaired consequences before they reached him. She had corrected numbers, calmed clients, and translated his arrogance into something others could tolerate. This time, she remained seated. Outside the conference room, Vanessa waited near the elevators. When Grant emerged, she moved toward him, but he stopped several feet away. You told me the invoices were protected, he said. Her face tightened. You approved them. Because you said no one would question them. Camille stepped into the corridor behind the directors. Vanessa saw her and turned. Sharply. This is what you wanted. Camille held the audit file against her side. No. This is what both of you believed would stay hidden. Vanessa looked toward Grant, but he no longer appeared certain that she belonged beside him. The elevator doors opened, and the chairman instructed security to collect Grant's access card. As he handed it over, his fingers hesitated. The small piece of plastic had once opened every floor in Ashbourne Tower. Now it opened nothing. Before entering the elevator, he looked back at Camille. What happens to the firm? He asked. The people who still believe in it will rebuild it, she said. The doors closed between them. Later that afternoon, Julian entered Camille's office carrying a report from the audit team. There is one final issue, he said. Ashbourne Capital's largest charitable foundation owns the estate you were forced to leave. Camille looked up slowly. Julian placed the deed on her desk. The foundation used company funds to maintain it. The board will have to decide whether the property should be sold. For the first time since sunrise on the morning she left, the house appeared before Camille not as a wound, but as a choice. The estate stood silent beneath a pale afternoon sky when Camille returned 2 days later. She arrived without cameras, without board members, and without the ruby gown that had turned every head at Ashbourne Tower. She wore a cream coat over a dark dress, her hair pulled back neatly, and Lenora's sapphire ring rested against the handle of her handbag. The front doors opened before she reached them. Mrs. Bell stood inside the foyer, her eyes filling with relief. Mrs. Ashbourne, she began, then stopped. Camille gave her a gentle smile. Camille is enough. The house looked almost unchanged. White orchids remained on the console table. Grant's books still lined the library shelves. The marble staircase curved upward beneath the chandelier where he had told her to leave. Yet the rooms no longer seemed enormous. Without his authority filling them, they were only rooms. Julian waited in the study with a representative from the charitable foundation. The property deed, maintenance records, and board resolution rested on the desk. Grant had transferred ownership of the estate to the Ashbourne Foundation 3 years earlier, allowing the company to cover expenses while he continued using it as a private residence. The arrangement had never been clearly disclosed to donors or directors. The foundation cannot justify keeping it, Julian said. The board can authorize a sale, recover the improper expenses, and direct the proceeds toward the programs the foundation was created to support. Camille walked to the window overlooking the rain garden she had designed. What programs are at risk? The representative opened a report. 2 women's business centers in Brooklyn and Newark faced closure. Both provided legal guidance, childcare support, and small business training to women rebuilding their lives after divorce, job loss, or financial abuse. Grant had praised those programs in public speeches while allowing their funding to shrink. Camille looked back toward the staircase. The house had once represented everything she believed she had lost. Now its value could become something useful. Sell it, she said. Restore every dollar charged to the foundation, then direct the remaining proceeds to those centers. Julian nodded. The board will approve that. A car door closed outside. Mrs. Bell appeared in the study entrance. Mr. Ashbourne is here. Grant entered moments later carrying no briefcase and wearing no tie. Administrative leave had stripped away the symbols he once used as armor. He looked from Camille to the documents on the desk. You are selling the house. The foundation is selling its property, she replied. It was never legally yours to keep. Grant exhaled and glanced around the study. You helped choose every room. That did not make the arrangement honest. Julian and the foundation representative quietly withdrew, leaving them alone. Grant remained near the doorway. Vanessa is gone, he said. Camille did not respond. She left when the payments became public. She says I made every decision. You did. He lowered his gaze. I thought you would enjoy hearing that she abandoned me. Your loneliness is not my reward. The words were neither cruel nor comforting. They were simply true. Grant walked toward the desk, but stopped before reaching it. The board says the audit may refer several matters to regulators. Then cooperate. If I do, the company could survive. Camille closed the property file. The company is already surviving. The question is whether you are willing to stop treating survival as ownership. He looked at her for a long moment. I do not know who you are anymore. Camille's expression softened, though not with regret. You knew who I was when I was useful to you. You just never imagined I could remain that woman without needing your permission. Outside, a real estate photographer crossed the lawn to begin documenting the property for sale. Grant heard the camera shutter through the window and finally understood that the house was no longer waiting for him. Camille lifted her handbag and moved toward the door. Where will you go? He asked. She paused beneath the chandelier. Somewhere I chose. As she stepped onto the front drive, Elias called with the final audit results. The board had scheduled Grant's removal vote for the following morning, and every deciding share would depend on Camille's recommendation. The removal vote began at 9 the next morning in the same boardroom where Grant had once announced acquisitions as if approval were a formality. This time, he sat at the far end of the table without an executive badge, without access to the company's systems, and without Vanessa beside him. Camille entered with Elias and took the seat reserved for Laurent Meridian. She wore a tailored ivory suit, Lenora's sapphire ring, and the calm expression Grant had mistaken for weakness throughout their marriage. The chairman opened the meeting by summarizing the audit findings: undisclosed payments, manipulated board materials, misuse of foundation property, and repeated failures to present material risks to directors. Grant listened without interruption. When the chairman finished, he looked toward Camille. Before the vote, Mr. Ashbourne has requested an opportunity to speak. Grant rose slowly. For the first time since Camille had known him, he did not begin with certainty. I spent years believing that leadership meant never appearing unsure, he said. Whenever someone questioned me, I treated it as disloyalty. Whenever Camille warned me, I told myself she was holding me back. His voice tightened, but he continued. The truth is that she was the only person who saw what I was becoming before the company did. No one moved. Camille did not lower her eyes. Grant turned toward her. I threw you out of a house you helped create because I wanted a life that never challenged me. I chose admiration over honesty. I do not expect forgiveness. He placed a signed document on the table. I will cooperate with the audit, repay every personal expense that can be traced to me, and resign from the charitable foundation. I am also withdrawing any claim against the sale of the estate. The chairman examined the document, then asked Grant to leave while the directors voted. Grant paused beside Camille's chair. Whatever happens, I am sorry. She looked at him steadily. Being sorry is where accountability begins, not where it ends. He nodded once and walked out. The doors closed behind him. The chairman called the vote. Laurent Meridian held enough preferred shares to determine the outcome, but Camille did not use them blindly. She reviewed the resolution one final time and amended it. Grant would be removed as chief executive officer, barred from managing company funds during the investigation, and required to cooperate with regulators. However, the firm would not be dismantled. Employees would keep their jobs, retirement accounts would be protected, and an independent leadership team would guide the restructuring. This company should not collapse because one man confused it with himself, Camille said. The resolution passed unanimously. Grant was informed in the corridor. He did not argue. He simply sat on a bench outside the boardroom, bent forward, and covered his face with his hands. The posture might have looked like defeat, but Camille understood it differently. For the first time, there was nothing left between him and the truth. She walked past without stopping. 6 months later, Ashbourne Capital operated under a new name and a new board. The sale of the estate funded both women's business centers for another decade. Laurent Meridian opened a third center in Harlem, dedicated to Lenora Laurent, where women rebuilding after divorce, financial loss, or betrayal could receive legal guidance, childcare, and investment training. Camille attended the opening in a deep blue dress, standing beneath bright windows while dozens of women filled the room behind her. She did not speak about Grant. She spoke about ownership, dignity, and the freedom of making decisions without fear. After the ceremony, Elias handed her a final envelope. Inside was the completed divorce decree. Camille signed where required, then stepped onto the sidewalk as morning light moved across the city. Across the street, Grant stood alone. He looked older, quieter, and no longer surrounded by people paid to agree with him. He did not approach. He only placed one hand over his heart and lowered his head. Camille acknowledged him with a small nod, then turned toward the waiting car. She had not become powerful because he lost everything. She had become powerful because losing him had finally taught her that she had never been empty.